Right now, you are likely running a high-performance engine on completely contaminated fuel. The Empire has convinced you that bone-deep work exhaustion is a badge of honor, but it is actually a biological operating system error destroying your cells. Welcome to the Fieldcast. I am John Michael, the Kingdom Formation Architect, and today we are fixing the productivity glitch.
Right now, you are likely running a high-performance engine on completely contaminated fuel.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it.
I mean, we've been told for decades, right, that the ultimate formula for success is to arrive first, leave last, and just burn the midnight oil.
Absolutely. We're constantly told to sweat our assets.
Right. But if you're listening to this and feeling completely drained by that relentless pace, like the crushing pace of your career, biological science and spiritual architecture are actually telling us the exact opposite.
They are. They're saying that this performative hustle is literally an operating system error.
Yeah, an OS error that is actively destroying your cells, which is wild.
It really is a profound systemic failure. I mean, we treat human biology as if it were, well, like a mechanical server rack.
Just left running 24/7.
Exactly. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And when that biological system inevitably begins to break down, our first instinct is to simply try harder.
Which just accelerates the structural damage.
Precisely.
And that is exactly why we are deconstructing such a unique and frankly vital intersection of topics today. Welcome to this deep dive.
It's great to be doing this one.
Whether you're, catching up on the latest in executive performance, prepping for a massive shift in how you lead your team, or maybe you are just simply exhausted and looking for a lifeline, you're in the right place.
For sure.
Our mission today is to help you diagnose the system errors in your own internal architecture. And then we're going to walk you through how to install a completely new, biologically sound operating system.
And we are pulling from a really remarkable stack of sources to do this.
Yeah, tell us about the sources.
So we're exploring the proprietary frameworks of a researcher and developer named John Michael.
Formerly known as Dr. John Kenworthy.
Right, exactly. And this material is grounded in 3 decades of doctoral research into managerial effectiveness and human performance.
So this isn't just pop psychology.
Not at all. It is not purely theoretical. It's deeply applied science.
Which is what makes it so fascinating. The specific documents we're unpacking include an audio transcript titled The Busyness Delusion.
Yeah, that one is eye-opening.
It really is. We also have a proprietary foundational document called Core Frameworks, and this really fascinating internal system directive known as the Theme Primer.
And the through line connecting all of this material is the crossroads of neuroscience, severe corporate burnout, and Christian spiritual architecture.
But before we can even begin to talk about installing a new spiritual or professional architecture, we really have to confront the glitch that is currently crashing your system.
Right, what the sources call the busyness delusion.
So let's get into that. What exactly is this delusion?
Well, the busyness delusion is basically the observable reality of the modern corporate hustle.
Okay.
It's this pervasive, deeply ingrained illusion that sheer effort automatically equals tangible results.
Like if I'm sweating, I must be doing a good job.
Exactly. The foundational mantra of the modern office environment is essentially, he who stays latest is working hardest and is therefore the most valuable.
I was reading this section where the author paints the picture of this delusion, and I mean, it is going to sound painfully visceral to you if you've ever worked in a high-pressure environment.
Oh, absolutely. The 16-hour slog.
Yes. The source describes this classic 16-hour slog. You're turning the office lights out at 10 o'clock at night.
And it's the exact same lights you switched on at 6 in the morning.
Right. You grab a quick, terrible bite to eat as you're literally running to catch the last train home.
Just completely depleted.
Totally. And you do this knowing full well that your kids are going to be fast asleep by the time you finally put your key in the front door.
But the real trap, and the author is really clear about this, isn't just the physical exhaustion of that day.
What is it then?
It's the psychological trap. It's what happens in your head while you're sitting on that late-night train.
Oh, the self-satisfaction part.
Yes. The text points out that as you finally sit down and your heart rate starts to slow, you actually relax into this feeling of profound self-satisfaction.
Because you feel like a martyr.
Exactly. You review everything you've done that day, the hundreds of emails, the endless meetings.
And you're trapped in this mistaken belief that your sheer volume of agonizing effort is directly translating into actual results.
Right. And real value for your company. but it's just a massive conflation of activity and achievement.
And this is where the sources introduce a concept borrowed from the financial sector, which is honestly wild when you realize how we apply it to human beings.
You mean sweating your assets?
Yes, sweating your assets. Can you break that down for us?
Sure. So in the financial and manufacturing worlds, sweating your assets is a very standard operational philosophy.
Okay.
If a business invests $1 million in a piece of heavy machinery, or like a massive server farm.
Or a fleet of delivery vehicles or something.
Right. The imperative is to use that asset as productively as humanly possible. Ideally, that machine should be running constantly.
Because if it's sitting idle, you're losing money.
Exactly. If it's powered down for the night, there's potential productivity and profit being left unused. So you sweat the asset to extract the absolute maximum financial return from your capital investment.
Which, I mean, makes perfect sense for a literal machine made of steel and microchips.
Sure, it's just math.
But corporate culture has taken this cold financial imperative and seamlessly applied it to human biology.
And the underlying logic is bizarre, but we universally accept it.
Yeah, it's like when human beings engage in intense physical labor, we literally sweat.
Right.
Therefore, the harder we work, the more we sweat, and by extension, the more productive and valuable we must be.
It's a deeply flawed logical leap. Equating exhaustion with excellence is somehow seen as a biological truth in the corporate world.
And John Michael provides two incredibly memorable real-world anecdotes in the text to illustrate just how absurd and entirely performative this culture of sweating really gets.
The first one takes place at a French company he worked for, right?
Yeah. Yes. I have to say, I laughed out loud reading the coat strategy from that French office.
It is pretty incredible.
It completely shatters the stereotype we often have of, the long, leisurely European lunch break.
It really does. The source describes this specific corporate culture as highly macho.
Okay, how so?
Well, the entire social hierarchy of the office was predicated on being seen to be busy. There was a literal, unspoken competition to be the absolute first person to arrive at the office in the morning.
And the very last person to leave at night, of course.
Exactly. The absolute baseline requirement for survival in that department was that you had to arrive earlier than your boss.
Right.
And you, under no circumstances, could leave before your boss had exited the building.
But because human beings cannot actually sustain that level of constant high-level productivity for 14 hours a day, the staff developed a brilliant, yet deeply tragic strategy.
The theatrical coat drop.
Yes. The author describes how employees would show up incredibly early, take off their coat or their jacket, and deliberately drape it over the back of their office chair.
And they would log into their computer terminals so their screen showed them as active on the network.
Right, and then they would just leave the floor.
They literally just walk away.
Yeah, they would go down to the cafeteria, get coffee, chat, read the paper.
Because the jacket draped over the chair was just a theatrical prop.
It's a decoy.
Exactly. It was a visual signal broadcast to the entire open plan office that said, I am here, I am working, my asset is sweating.
And the author notes a brilliant, almost comedic observation about the resulting environment.
But when the boss walks through.
Yes. Whenever a senior boss would actually walk through the department, there would be an immediate, ridiculous flurry of sudden activity.
People just rushing down hallways with papers.
Typing furiously, looking incredibly stressed. And he writes that he could never quite figure out whether people were so busy because they were constantly focused on being seen to be busy, or whether they were genuinely busy because they had wasted so much of their actual working day simply appearing to be busy.
It's an endless self-feeding loop of performative exhaustion.
It really is. And then the source contrasts that cold climate corporate theater with a very visceral physical analogy from where the author lives in Singapore.
Yeah, the air conditioning analogy.
Right. He talks about how incredibly easy it is to get a sweat on in a tropical climate like Singapore. All you have to do is turn off the air conditioning in your office.
Sitting in a room in Singapore with the air conditioning turned off will absolutely guarantee that you start sweating profusely within minutes.
For sure.
But, as the text dryly notes, sweating for the sake of sweating doesn't magically generate productivity.
It doesn't write a better report.
No, it doesn't close a complex sale. It just makes you physically hot, deeply uncomfortable, and frankly, a little pungent.
We all inherently know that sitting in a hot room sweating doesn't make us better workers.
Of course not.
Yet, we have built entire multi-billion-dollar corporate ecosystems around the exact same delusion. We demand the metaphorical sweat.
And here is where the source completely shifts perspective. The text delves into the massive neurological waste of this performative behavior.
Yeah, let's talk about the cognitive load.
When we talk about cognitive load, think about the sheer amount of brain power we spend simply managing our own optics. The neurological waste is staggering.
How does the text break that down?
Well, you're sitting at your desk, burning massive amounts of neurological effort, worrying about what everyone else in the office is thinking about your work ethic.
Right. Do they think I'm slacking off?
Exactly. But the tragic irony is that they are not evaluating your work ethic at all.
What do they do?
They are entirely consumed with worrying about what you are thinking about their work ethic.
It is a complete hall of mirrors.
It really is.
You are spending your prefrontal cortex bandwidth thinking about what they're thinking about you.
But they aren't thinking about you.
Because they are spending all their bandwidth thinking about what you are thinking about them thinking about you.
And biologically, this is catastrophic. Your prefrontal cortex is the executive center of your brain.
Okay, so that's the part that does the heavy lifting.
Right. It's responsible for complex problem solving, abstract reasoning, and actual deep work productivity.
But you are hijacking that critical processor.
Exactly. You're using it exclusively to run a threat detection simulation regarding your social status in the office hierarchy.
Wow. And to prove just how deeply ingrained this demand for perceived effort is in our psychology, the source brings in a fascinating example from behavioral economics.
Ah, the Dan Ariely research.
Yes, the research on the perceived value of a locksmith. And this completely explains why we punish people for efficiency.
The locksmith example perfectly illustrates the human flaw in how we assign value.
Walk us through it.
Imagine you lock yourself out of your house and you hire a locksmith who is essentially a beginner. He arrives and he struggles.
Right, he's taking his time.
He spends an hour picking the lock. He is sweating. He is visibly frustrated. He might even accidentally scratch the paint on your doorframe.
This sounds awful.
But after an hour of intense, visible labor, he finally pops the door open. When he hands you a bill for $100, the human psychological response is to gladly pay it.
Because you look at him and think, wow, he worked really hard for an hour, he struggled, he earned that money.
Exactly. But contrast that with hiring a true master locksmith.
Okay.
The master shows up, looks at the lock, pulls out a tool, and because they have decades of refined skill and expertise, they pop the door open in 2 minutes flat.
Zero struggle, zero sweat, zero damage to the door.
Right. And when that master locksmith asks for the exact same $100 to solve the exact same problem,
People get absolutely furious.
they do. They feel completely ripped off.
They feel cheated because they didn't get to witness the locksmith's sweat.
They didn't see the struggle, so they don't perceive the value.
That is so true. As a society, we have been deeply conditioned to reward the visible time and painful effort it takes to complete a task.
Rather than rewarding the quiet, efficient mastery that solves the problem instantly.
And the source summarizes this frustrating reality with a brilliant quote, doesn't it?
It does. If you were any good at the job, you'd do it in half the time. But our corporate structures actively punish people for that exact efficiency.
We demand the performance, and the source actually cites a Harvard Business School study that proves we demand this performance even from our machines.
Oh, the search engine study. That one is wild.
It is. The study looked at how human beings interact with search engines and data aggregating websites.
Like travel sites, right?
Exactly. When people search for a complex result online, like finding the best flight path or comparing insurance quotes, they actually prefer to use a website that provides a deliberate illusion of working hard to load those results.
It's an incredible finding. Users want to watch a progress bar slowly fill up.
I want the little magnifying glass animation.
Yeah. They want to see visual indicators that the site is actively scouring databases, compiling information, and doing heavy lifting.
Even if the website's algorithm is so powerful that it can deliver the correct data instantaneously.
Right. User satisfaction actually drops if the data appears too fast. The progress bar increases the perceived value of the results.
We literally want the website to be seen jumping through digital hoops. We want the server to sweat.
It is not enough to just deliver the data. You have to put on a show of immense effort.
And if we demand that a literal algorithm puts on a performative show of hard work, imagine the immense, crushing psychological pressure a mid-level executive feels to put on a show for their vice president.
It's massive. The people who get promoted in these environments are almost always the ones who are highly visible.
The ones rushing around sending emails at midnight.
Exactly, rather than the ones who quietly and efficiently complete their actual tasks by 5 p.m.
But here is the critical pivot in the source material. While the culture demands the parade of busyness, the actual biological toll is devastating.
We touched on the phrase sweating your assets earlier.
Right.
If you apply that to a piece of technology like a smartphone, and you force the screen to stay on at maximum brightness 24 hours a day, running complex applications without ever letting it sleep, what happens?
The battery degrades rapidly. The internal components overheat. The literal cells inside the lithium battery begin to die much faster than their intended life cycle.
And that technological reality maps perfectly onto the terrifying biological point the source makes next.
What's the biological reality?
The text references clinical research showing that these sustained high levels of performative stress and cortisol actually cause the cells in the human body to age prematurely.
Wow. So you are quite literally degrading your own biological battery.
It is cellular degradation caused by chronic stress, which leads to a profound contradiction that the author highlights.
Okay, what's the contradiction?
If this performative busyness is biologically destructive, and if it is actively aging our cells, why do our leaders and bosses continue to demand and reward it?
That is the million-dollar question. I mean, if it's killing us and it's not actually producing better work, why is it the standard?
Because, as the text explicitly argues, we are participating in a shared delusion.
A shared delusion.
Yeah. The author states very clearly, what your boss really wants is just help getting things done.
They don't want the theatrics.
No, they do not actually want a task analyzed to death. They do not want it endlessly debated in superfluous meetings.
And they don't need it paraded around the office so everyone can see how hard you are working on it.
Right. They just want the load carried and the problem solved.
But the environment itself forces the opposite behavior.
Precisely. We are trapped in an environmental system that demands we jump through hoops, and more importantly, punishes us if we are not seen jumping through them.
It is a fundamental structural flaw in the reality we operate in.
And you cannot fix a structural flaw by just telling the workers to try harder.
Which brings us to a massive systemic diagnosis. If performative busyness is destroying our biology, and we keep doing it anyway because the environment demands it,
then there must be a deeply flawed, overarching operating system running in the background.
right, an OS running our lives, forcing this behavior. We are running corrupted software.
The sources refer to this precisely as an OS error, an operating system error.
Okay.
And the foundational document, the theme primer, lays out the architecture of this error in incredibly stark, unyielding terms.
It introduces a core fundamental conflict, right?
Yes, the conflict that defines the rest of the material, the empire versus the kingdom.
This is where the framework becomes highly unique. And we need to spend some time defining these two opposing operating systems because they form the entire basis for the structural rewiring we're going to talk about.
Let's start with the corrupted software.
Right. The source defines this as the empire.
The empire is categorized fundamentally as the enemy. It represents the worldly default operating system that governs almost every aspect of modern society.
And how does the author define its characteristics?
Through three words: comparison, competition, and contention.
Comparison, competition, and contention. That is the operating system that demands the coat on the chair.
Exactly.
It is the system that demands the 16-hour slog. It is the system that forces you to check your email at 11 p.m. because you are terrified your colleague is going to look more dedicated than you.
Yes. The empire runs entirely on metrics, scarcity, and the continuous demand for visible performance.
But here is the most critical and perhaps most challenging sociological and theological claim the author makes about the empire.
This part is fascinating.
Crucially, the text explicitly states that the empire's operating system heavily includes the modern institutional church.
It does. And that's a bold claim.
This was a genuine shock to read. This framework isn't just taking aim at Wall Street banks or massive corporate conglomerates. It is actively, directly critiquing modern religion. Whether you consider yourself deeply religious or completely secular, the systemic pattern the author identifies here is vital to understand. The source argues that the institutional church has essentially copy-pasted the corporate world's toxic operating system.
The author details how religious institutions have adopted the exact same corporate metrics as the secular marketplace to measure their worth.
What kind of metrics?
They measure success by weekend attendance numbers, by the volume of financial giving, by the flawless production value of their services.
They demand an absolute flawless exterior from their leadership and their congregations.
And in one of the most striking phrases in the text, the author states that the modern church often treats people like batteries to be drained.
Wow. Let that sink in for a moment. Treating human beings like batteries to be drained.
That's brutal.
Whether it is a corporate vice president demanding you sweat your assets to hit a Q3 revenue target, or a religious institution demanding endless hours of volunteer work while maintaining a perfect moral facade to keep attendance high.
It is the exact same toxic operating system.
It is the empire. It severely punishes failure, it demands relentless performance, and it entirely ignores your biological limits.
But standing in direct, radical opposition to the empire is what the text calls the kingdom.
Okay, so what is the kingdom?
The kingdom is defined as the rebellion. It is described as a biological and spiritual operating system designed specifically by Jesus.
And the defining characteristics of this kingdom system are wild, especially when you contrast them directly with the demands of the empire.
They're completely countercultural.
The kingdom is not built on performance. It is built on rest. It is built on neuroplasticity. It is built on psychological safety.
Notice the vocabulary there: rest, neuroplasticity, psychological safety.
Right, it's very scientific.
These are clinical biological terms integrated directly into a spiritual framework. Jesus, according to this architecture, is positioned as the ultimate rebel against the exhausting machinery of the empire.
And the text highlights a profound operational difference between the two, doesn't it?
It does. The empire filters strictly for competence, polish, and performance. The kingdom, the author states, filters entirely for hunger.
Jesus filters for hunger, not competence. That completely rewrites the job description for anyone feeling like they aren't enough.
It's incredibly freeing.
So, if you are listening to this right now and you are feeling that crushing, bone-deep exhaustion we talked about at the beginning, this framework is deeply validating your experience.
Yes. The theme primer specifically identifies the target audience for these exact tools as the misfits.
The misfits, who are they?
The misfits are defined as Christian marketplace leaders, executives, and professionals who are completely and utterly exhausted.
They're burnt out.
They are burnt out by the relentless corporate hustle, and simultaneously, they are deeply cynical about the performative machinery of modern religion.
So they love Jesus, but they have a profound distaste for the religious machine that treats them like a battery.
Exactly. And the framework gives a very clear, strict directive on how to approach someone experiencing this specific type of burnout.
What's the directive?
It says, do not preach at them. Do not give them another theological lecture.
Because they're already exhausted.
Right. Validate their exhaustion. Tell them unequivocally that their burnout is not a moral failing.
I want to emphasize that point because it subverts the standard narrative. Your burnout is not a moral failing. You do not lack character.
It's so important to hear that.
The text defines your burnout simply as a biological response to an impossible operating system. It is an OS error.
You are attempting to run delicate human biology on a brutal software program designed to treat you like a machine.
And the hardware is finally crashing.
Which brings up a fascinating point. The sources actively critique modern religion for using corporate metrics.
Right?
So if I am an exhausted executive and I go to a conventional church program or a standard Bible study looking for relief, the author implies that this won't actually fix my exhaustion.
Why is that? Why doesn't the Bible study work?
Because conventional religious programs almost entirely rely on behavior modification. They operate within the same empire system.
Oh, I see.
If you are burned out, the standard religious answer is often to tell you to try harder. Pray more, read more chapters, attend more small groups, volunteer for more committees.
But mechanically, what does that actually do to a person?
It just adds more busyness. It adds more cognitive load to a system that is already crashing.
It is like asking a degraded smartphone battery that is already at 2% to power up a massive new application.
Precisely. You are simply moving the performative hustle from the corporate boardroom into the religious sanctuary.
You are still sweating your assets, just for a different boss.
The text states explicitly that true spiritual formation cannot just be about trying harder. It must be anchored in absolute biological reality.
Because you cannot fix a biological stress loop with more behavioral metrics.
Regardless of whether those are sales metrics or attendance metrics.
And that phrase, biological reality, is the absolute linchpin of everything we're discussing today. To truly understand why the empire system fails us so spectacularly, we have to look closely at the intersection of neuroscience and scripture.
The theme primer refers to this critical intersection as the double whammy.
The double whammy, I love that term.
The foundational rule of this entire architecture is that you cannot separate the soul from the nervous system. Every single spiritual problem has a deeply embedded biological component.
The neuroscience integrated into this framework is heavy, and it is fascinating. We are talking about the physical mechanics of what happens to your brain when you are placed in toxic environments.
Like that French office where you have to hide your coat, or a hyper-competitive church environment.
Exactly. The text specifically calls out the mechanisms of amygdala hijacks, sustained high cortisol levels, massive cognitive load, and the brain's constant exhausting state of threat detection.
And we should contextualize why this biological focus is so prominent. This methodology isn't just a philosophical thought experiment.
Right. It's based on John Michael's research.
The text highlights that this kingdom systems architecture is built upon his 3 decades of doctoral research and peer-reviewed findings in the field of human performance.
His research isn't strictly in abstract theology. It is deeply rooted in managerial effectiveness.
The sources list the core pillars of his academic and practical research. He completed a doctoral thesis on using high-stress simulations to develop managerial capability.
Wow.
He conducted a massive specific study on the exact attributes of managerial effectiveness in Singapore. He developed work on performance architecture, specifically contrasting the illusion of competence with actual competency.
And he researched the bridge from thwarted corporate innovation to disruptive technology.
So we are dealing with a deeply credentialed scientific approach to how the human brain actually performs under severe pressure.
And what his research, combined with the spiritual architecture, reveals about the mechanics of burnout is terrifying.
It really is. Let's talk about the amygdala hijack.
When we talk about an amygdala hijack, we aren't just using a clinical buzzword. We are talking about a severe physiological event. The text explains that when an executive is deeply burnt out, their amygdala, which is the primal fear, survival, and threat detection center of the brain.
The lizard brain, basically.
Yes. It literally hijacks control away from their prefrontal cortex, which is the logical, reasoning, and planning center.
The physical connection is functionally severed. When that hijack happens, your brain is flooded with cortisol and adrenaline.
Your peripheral vision literally narrows.
Your heart rate spikes.
Yeah.
And in that physiological state, you physically do not have the neurological bandwidth for complex, abstract thought, let alone deep spiritual theology.
Because you're in survival mode.
You cannot process high-level concepts because your brain is entirely 100% consumed with immediate biological survival.
Think about what that actually feels like. It's that specific moment in a Tuesday morning status meeting where the CEO asks you a pointed question about a failed metric.
Oh man, panic.
Your chest tightens. You physically cannot remember the data points you prepared.
Your brain isn't processing the meeting. Your brain literally thinks the CEO is a predator.
So if I am that burnt out executive, my brain is literally physically incapable of engaging in deep spiritual formation or complex problem solving because the amygdala has stormed the control room.
Right.
It is like trying to learn to conjugate French verbs while actively running from a grizzly bear. You can't.
The bear analogy is exactly right.
Your brain is screaming, "Survive the bear," not "learn the language."
You cannot learn a language while running from a bear,
Oh.
and you cannot engage in meaningful spiritual or professional growth while your cortisol levels are maxed out from a toxic, empire-driven work environment.
And this is exactly why the text insists that the kingdom principles are not just nice ideas, they are biologically necessary interventions. So how does the framework connect those spiritual principles to the biology?
The text insists that we must link kingdom principles like grace, rest, and surrender to actual measurable biological healing.
These aren't just soft religious words to make you feel better.
Exactly. Grace and rest are biological mechanisms that actively downregulate the sympathetic nervous system.
Okay, so they physically calm you down.
Surrender is the cognitive act that allows the amygdala to stand down, which physically restores blood flow and function to the prefrontal cortex. They are the prerequisites that foster neuroplasticity.
They are the antidote to the bear. Grace tells the brain the bear is gone.
Exactly. But it is incredibly difficult to realize that in the moment.
Oh, for sure.
If you try to run a deep psychological diagnostic while you are staring at 500 unread emails and your boss is screaming for a report, you will fail. The system will crash.
If the bear is currently chasing you, you cannot simply tell yourself, "Hey, stop running from the bear, let's practice grace."
You absolutely can't. And that is a huge flaw in so much leadership advice. It tells you to be mindful while you are actively being hunted.
It's useless advice.
The author recognizes this constraint perfectly. The text argues that we must first break the immediate biological stress loop so the brain has the physical capacity to heal.
We don't need theory in that moment.
We need tactical blueprints. As the source vividly states, when you are in war zone, you need a tactical blueprint for survival, not a polished TED Talk in a boardroom.
And those tactical blueprints are what make up the actual kingdom systems architecture outlined in the core frameworks document.
Right.
The author says we must systematically install a completely new architecture to bridge the biological reality of our nervous system with the truth of this kingdom operating system.
And this architecture is brilliantly divided into two distinct parts.
Let's start by looking deeply at part one, the diagnostic systems.
The logic here is sound engineering. Before we can patch the software or rebuild the engine, we need to run a deep diagnostic on the current glitches that are actively crashing your system.
So we need to locate the specific structural flaws in your leadership and understand your internal biology.
The document breaks down 4 foundational diagnostic frameworks, and the first is simply called the master architecture.
What does that one do?
The master architecture is the macro view. The text calls it the foundational blueprint. You engage with this diagnostic to understand the why.
Why does the corporate world trigger such a severe biological threat response in you?
It maps out the exact mechanics of how your environment creates the stress loop, and fundamentally how yielding control to what the author calls the ultimate architect, meaning God, actually begins to rewrite your internal source code.
It sets the stage. But then we get into the highly specific, actionable tools. The second diagnostic is incredibly powerful. It is called the 4F framework, tracing the root.
The 4F framework is described in the sources as the master diagnostic tool.
Okay, what are the 4Fs?
It is a systematic method for tracing withered leadership fruit back through your field and your fire to discover the hidden internal root system causing the failure.
Let's walk through a real-world scenario of how this 4F concept works, because it's brilliant. If you think about a tree, the fruit is the visible, tangible outcome. In a corporate setting, withered fruit might be a toxic team culture, a massive spike in employee turnover, or your own personal crippling cynicism.
And the typical corporate response to withered fruit is behavior modification. If turnover is high, HR throws a pizza party or offers a small bonus.
They try to tape new, shiny fruit onto a dying tree.
But the 4F diagnostic forces you to trace the symptom backward. First, you examine the field.
What's the field?
The field is the environment you are operating in. Is your field a hyper-competitive, open-plan office where everyone is monitoring each other's screen time?
Are you in that French company where everyone is hanging coats on chairs?
Right. Then you look at the fire. The fire represents the active pressures, the trials, the immediate heat you are under.
Are you facing a massive Q3 revenue target? Is there an impending round of layoffs creating terror in the department?
And finally, you trace the withered fruit, the toxic field, and the intense fire all the way down to the root.
The root is the bottom layer.
The root is the fundamental hidden belief or false operating system that is actually driving your reactions.
So the diagnostic asks, are you reacting to the fire out of the empire's terrifying demand for performance? Or are you operating from the kingdom's unshakable foundation of rest?
Exactly. The withered fruit is just a symptom of a diseased root.
Once you've analyzed the root, the third diagnostic tool takes us directly inside the mind. It's called the formation engine, the law of the throne.
The imagery used here is highly evocative. The premise is that there is a throne or a central control room inside your mind.
Okay.
And when you are burnt out, exhausted, or reacting aggressively out of fear, it is because toxic usurpers have stormed that control room and are currently driving your mind.
Who exactly are these usurpers? If we look at the biology we've discussed, the usurpers are the biological hijacks.
Right.
The usurper is severe anxiety. It is the desperate need for perceived value. It is the paralyzing fear of what the VP is thinking of your presentation.
The usurper is the amygdala screaming about the bear, entirely locking out your rational brain.
Exactly. And this formation engine diagnostic helps you precisely identify those usurpers by name.
Once you identify what is driving the vehicle, the framework teaches you how to, in the words of the text, storm the control room to reinstall the true king.
It is a methodology for deliberately taking back your executive function and yielding it to a higher biological and spiritual authority, rather than letting pure panic steer your life into a ditch.
And the fourth diagnostic addresses the exhaustion itself. It is the power bank of needs, recharging motivation.
This is the specific tool you deploy when you are running completely on empty.
Right. It is designed to help you identify which false power sources you have been plugging into that are secretly draining your internal battery.
False power sources. This is such a critical concept.
What's an example of that?
Well, a false power source is the dopamine hit of sending an email at 11:45 p.m. just so your boss sees the late timestamp. It feels like power. It feels like security, but it's toxic.
Yes, the illusion of busyness is a massive false power source. You plug into it thinking it will give you energy, status, or safety.
But biologically, it is a parasitic draw. It is draining your battery and aging your cells.
The Power Bank diagnostic identifies these specific leaks in your life and teaches you how reorienting your motivation, specifically giving God glory rather than seeking your own validation, actually functionally recharges the entire biological and spiritual system.
The ultimate goal of these 4 diagnostics is to move a leader from a state of frantic reaction to quiet authority.
Which is a huge shift.
And I see exactly how connecting the power bank of needs, back to our earlier discussion on the perceived value of the locksmith, makes total sense. Looking busy to appease others is contaminated fuel.
It'll run the engine for a while, but it will eventually destroy the pistons.
But I have to bring us back to the reality of the boardroom here.
Okay.
Running a root diagnostic, identifying usurpers in your mental control room, that requires immense introspection.
It does.
If my amygdala is currently hijacked by a screaming boss and my brain is flooded with cortisol, I physically cannot access the prefrontal cortex required to run a 4F diagnostic.
The bear is in the room.
Yes. I can't analyze my root system while I'm being eaten.
You are absolutely right. And John Michael's architecture fully accounts for this biological roadblock.
How so?
You cannot run a complex diagnostic program while the computer is actively blue screening. You need a hard reset. You need an immediate tactical override.
And that is exactly where part 2 of the architecture comes into play. The tactical protocols.
The tactical protocols are the immediate circuit breakers.
So they're the active tools.
Right. The text describes these as active engineered frameworks specifically designed to forcefully override your panic biology, build new structural habits, and fundamentally change the way you communicate in the high-stress marketplace.
There are 4 tactical protocols listed in the sources, and the very first one directly answers my question about the screaming amygdala. It's called the PCPCR protocol, the stress override.
This is the most crucial tactical circuit breaker in the entire system. The source defines PCPCR as a precise 5-step sequence.
What's its purpose?
Its singular biological purpose is to short-circuit an active amygdala hijack, forcefully pause the biological stress loop, and allow your prefrontal cortex to come back online so you can make deliberate choices under intense pressure.
It is the emergency stop button for your nervous system. If we break down the mechanics of a stress override like PCPCR, what does it stand for?
It fundamentally operates on pause, center yourself physically to lower your heart rate, pray or process the actual reality of the threat rather than the perceived threat, choose your deliberate response, and then actually respond.
It forces you to stop acting like a cornered animal in a board meeting.
And once you have successfully executed the PCPCR protocol and stopped the immediate hijack within yourself, you still have to interact with the environment. You have to talk to the boss or the team.
That brings us to the second protocol, the hijacks framework, the relational rhythm.
This is the communication protocol. And it is vital because if you are highly stressed, the people around you in the corporate environment are likely highly stressed too.
Everyone is running from their own bear. Everyone has their defensive walls up.
Right. If you just throw data or corporate jargon at a highly stressed person, their amygdala will perceive it as an attack.
So what does hijacks do?
The HUD-GS framework is a structured communication sequence designed to completely bypass those defensive biological barriers. It operates on the principle of hearing the underlying emotion, understanding the context, giving validation or grace, and speaking directly to the core need.
It builds deeply meaningful, disarming connections rather than just exchanging superficial corporate hostility.
Then we arrive at the third protocol, which I find incredibly fascinating from a neurological standpoint. Because once you survive the meeting, how do you make sure you don't just fall back into the same toxic patterns tomorrow?
You need the STEPS protocol, the habit builder.
STEP is the behavioral change engine of the architecture. And the specific vocabulary used in the text here is incredibly precise and crucial.
What does it say?
It states that you must apply this protocol to dismantle old reactive triggers and install new kingdom habits through actions that are safe, incremental, and minuscule.
Minuscule actions. Why the emphasis on minuscule? Why not massive sweeping changes?
It's the bear.
Because of the bear. Explain the biology of that.
If you decide to make a massive sweeping change to your life or your leadership style all at once, say, deciding you will never answer another email after 5 p.m. ever again, your brain interprets that massive behavioral shift as a severe threat to your survival in the corporate hierarchy.
So the amygdala detects instability.
Yes, it sounds the alarm, floods you with cortisol, and the bear's back. You panic and revert to your old habits immediately.
So large, sudden changes actively trigger the brain's threat detection system.
Exactly. But minuscule, safe, incremental actions slip entirely past the amygdala's radar.
They are too small to trigger a threat response.
But over time, those tiny, safe actions foster neuroplasticity, the brain's literal ability to rewire its neural pathways. You build the new habit without ever setting off the biological alarms. It creates safety.
I have an analogy for this that clicked for me as I was reading.
Oh, let's hear it.
These protocols sound exactly like writing a macro for a computer. Instead of trying harder to type out a complex sequence of code manually every single time while your system is freezing up, you write a macro.
You assign it to a hotkey.
Yeah. You press one button and the system runs the entire sequence automatically. And using minuscule actions to build that macro reminds me of debugging software.
That's a great point.
You don't delete and rewrite the entire program at once. You debug it one single line of code at a time so you don't crash the whole system.
That is a brilliant analogy, and it perfectly captures the engineering mindset behind John Michael's entire architecture.
It is highly modular.
You do not try to overhaul your entire spiritual and professional life in one exhausting weekend retreat. You run the diagnostic to find the exact line of code that is glitching, and then you deploy specific engineered protocols to rewrite your nervous system step by step, line by line.
And the final protocol provides the environment for all of this rewiring to take place safely. It is the How W framework, the discipleship cycle.
The How W framework is the daily operational rhythm. It is described as a continuous, repeating cycle used to heal religious trauma, absorb absolute truth, and actively walk the narrow path with Jesus in the daily reality of the marketplace.
Notice that phrase again, heal religious trauma. The text does not shy away from the severe psychological damage done by the empire's version of the institutional church.
It really doesn't.
This framework provides a daily biological rhythm to actively detox from that exhausting, performance-based religion.
It creates a completely new, safe environment, a new field, if we use the 4F terminology. It creates a field where your root system can actually begin to absorb nutrients and heal, instead of spending all its energy just fighting off environmental toxins.
But here is where the deep dive takes a fascinating turn. To make these new habits stick, to truly install this new architecture and guarantee that the new lines of code don't immediately get corrupted by the old system.
We have to talk about the language.
Yes, the framework insists on a practice I absolutely was not expecting. The text states we have to fundamentally, ruthlessly change the language we use.
The vocabulary pivot. This is perhaps one of the most striking and strict directives found in the theme primer.
What's the premise?
The premise is simple but profound. To rewrite the internal code, you must change the syntax you use to speak to yourself and others.
The text outlines incredibly strict vocabulary constraints for anyone using this system. It explicitly bans the use of standard corporate jargon and equally bans standard religious jargon.
Because those specific words carry the heavy biological baggage of the empire.
When you hear them, they instantly trigger the old biological threat responses.
The author even dictates a very specific tone for how this material must be written and spoken.
It's very particular.
It is to be communicated in British English. Short, sharp, direct sentences. No fluff.
It must be explicitly compassionate, but highly tactical, again, like handing out essential blueprints in a war zone. You don't use flowery language when you are defusing a bomb.
And then the document actually gives us the list of banned words and their required replacements.
First, the text says, do not say leadership.
Which is wild.
This entire framework is designed for marketplace leaders, and you aren't allowed to use the word. Instead of leadership, you must use agency, stewardship, or authority.
Think deeply about the biological and psychological difference between those words. In the corporate world, the word leadership carries immense baggage.
It implies total control, dominance, being at the absolute top of the pyramid.
And the heavy burden of sweating your asses to drag your team to the finish line. It is a highly stressful, cortisol-inducing concept.
But stewardship,
Stewardship, on the other hand, implies that you are carefully tending to something that ultimately belongs to someone else. Agency implies you have the power to act, but within a clearly defined, safe scope.
changing the word literally lowers your cognitive load.
It completely changes your relationship to the responsibility. It takes the weight off your shoulders.
The next mandate. Do not say success. Instead, you must use the words wholeness, alignment, or the Hebrew word sakal, which translates to good success.
Because what does success mean in the empire? It means the 16-hour day.
It means utterly defeating the competition.
It means the coat permanently draped on the chair. It is an external metric. Wholeness and alignment force you to focus entirely on the internal state and health of the engine, rather than just obsessing over the speed the car is traveling.
Then we get to my favorite one. Do not say, try harder.
Oh, man.
How many times in our lives, both in the office and in the church, have we been told that the solution to our exhaustion is simply to try harder?
Too many. Instead, the framework dictates you must say, install the protocol, execute the framework, or rewire the system.
Because try harder is, at its core, a moral judgment. It implies that your current failure or burnout is due entirely to a lack of personal willpower or character.
Execute the framework is a neutral engineering directive. It completely removes the shame. It says, the system failed. That's okay. Let's run the diagnostic and apply the structural fix.
Which perfectly leads to the absolute most controversial vocabulary pivot in the entire document. The text mandates, do not say sin in a purely moralistic, condemning way.
Instead, you must describe it as a structural glitch, a system error, or a biological hijack.
This represents a massive, profound shift in how we process spiritual language and personal failure.
It really does.
Okay, we have to unpack this because I can hear the pushback right now. Calling a moral failing or a sin a structural glitch or a biological hijack could almost sound to some people like we are actively avoiding personal responsibility.
I can see how it sounds like that.
It sounds like a sophisticated way of saying, the devil or my amygdala made me do it.
Right.
But in the context of this biological framework, it seems like relabeling it actually gives you a practical, actionable way to fix the behavior rather than just wallowing in abstract, paralyzing guilt. Is that the ultimate goal here?
That is precisely the goal, and it touches on the core genius of the architecture. Knowledge is only valuable when it can be functionally applied.
Okay.
If you view a personal failure purely as a moral failing, as a sin, in the highly punitive, empire-driven church sense, what is the immediate biological response in your body?
The response is deep, profound shame.
And as we've established, shame is a massive threat. Shame triggers the threat response.
Yes, shame instantly activates the amygdala. It creates overwhelming fear of rejection. It violently spikes your cortisol, and it functionally shuts down your prefrontal cortex.
You cannot think your way out of shame. By deliberately removing the crushing shame associated with failing the empire's metrics and accurately relabeling that failure as a structural glitch, you instantly create psychological safety within yourself.
And as we established earlier, psychological safety is the absolute non-negotiable biological prerequisite for neuroplasticity.
You physically cannot rewire a brain that is drowning in cortisol and shame. You can only rewire a brain that feels safe enough to learn.
That is incredible. A biological hijack isn't a weak excuse. It is a precise scientific diagnosis. And once you have the accurate diagnosis, you can actually take responsibility by installing the PC-PCR protocol to structurally fix it.
Exactly. It allows you to take true, highly effective responsibility for your actions and your growth, without being crushed by the paralyzing weight of external condemnation.
You step out of a state of frantic, fearful reaction, and you step into a state of quiet, grounded authority.
Which brings us full circle on this massive deep dive.
We started today by looking at the exhausting, pervasive delusion of performative busyness, the theatrical coats on chairs, the toxic financial concept of sweating human assets, the bizarre illusion that endless, agonizing effort automatically equals value.
We systematically diagnose that exhausting behavior not as a personal failing, but as symptoms of a deeply flawed operating system, the empire, which relentlessly demands performance and drains human beings like batteries, whether you were sitting in a corporate office or sitting in a church pew.
We explored the incredible biological reality of the soul, the double whammy rule that every spiritual problem has a neurological component.
We looked at how an amygdala hijack physically, biologically prevents you from engaging in complex spiritual growth, and why grace and rest are scientific necessities, not just nice ideas.
And finally, we walk through the mechanics of the kingdom system's architecture, using diagnostic tools like the 4F framework to trace the root of the problem, and deploying tactical protocols like PC-PCR and STEPS to literally rewrite the brain's source code using safe, minuscule actions and a radically new, shame-free vocabulary.
The final directive in the core frameworks document is a direct, urgent call to action for you, the listener.
What does it say?
It says, stop collecting information and start installing the architecture. It challenges you to choose just a single framework today to address your most critical leadership glitch.
And if you are entirely overwhelmed by the muddy waters of your own burnout, the text says it's time to bring in the architect.
You can actually schedule a reality check session with their team at hello@whatsbetter.today to have them help you diagnose your specific operating system.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over.
This is a really good one.
We have talked extensively today about how our human brains are biologically hardwired to constantly detect threats and desperately seek safety, and how the corporate world weaponizes that biology by constantly triggering that threat response with its impossible metrics.
Right.
But think deeply about this. What if our ultimate biological state of true rest isn't actually sleep?
What if true, profound biological rest is the exact moment we completely and willingly surrender the control room of our minds to something or someone entirely outside of ourselves?
Wow. Yielding the control room to the true king so the engine can finally stop running on contaminated fuel.
That's the ultimate goal.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Take some time today to think critically about your own internal operating system and the fuel you are using.
And remember, when you are looking at the murky, exhausting waters of your own burnout, you aren't just a broken machine waiting to be scrapped.
You are a complex, beautiful, biological, and spiritual system, and there are blueprints available to help you rebuild. We will catch you next time.
You cannot outwork a biological stress loop, and you must stop treating your soul like a battery to be drained. It is time to step out of the panic and into quiet authority. Join the resistance and get your free access to the Refit Protocols at link.whatsbetter.today. KFA out.